The cathedral stood like a timeless sentinel in the heart of the town, its towering spires piercing the morning mist. Inside, the air was thick with the fragrance of incense and faint echoes of whispered prayers. The golden rays of the early sun streamed through the ornate stained glass windows, casting vibrant patterns of saints and angels onto the polished stone floor. It was a Sunday morning, and the congregation had gathered for the weekly Mass. Families sat together in pews, children squirming slightly, while their elders murmured responses to the priest's prayers. The choir's harmonious chants filled the cavernous space, resonating off the ancient walls. At the front of the cathedral, a grand statue of St. John Paul II stood with an outstretched hand, as if in perpetual blessing. The statue's lifelike detail seemed to draw reverence from every eye, its presence a comforting reminder of the saint's legacy of faith and love. The priest, clad in flowing white vestments adorned with golden embroidery, stood at the altar, preparing to deliver the sermon. His voice was calm and steady, a soothing cadence that matched the tranquil atmosphere. The flickering candles around the altar cast warm, dancing light, and the congregation listened intently, many with bowed heads and clasped hands. Outside, the town was quiet, with the occasional sound of birds chirping or a breeze rustling the leaves. It seemed like a perfect morning, untouched by disruption or disturbance. The cathedral doors, wide open to invite latecomers, creaked slightly as the wind brushed against them. As the Mass reached its midpoint, a serene stillness settled over the congregation. The priest paused to allow a moment of silent prayer, and all was peaceful. But just then, faint noises from the distance broke the quiet, a sharp, insistent barking. At first, it seemed distant, barely noticeable against the backdrop of solemnity, but the barking grew louder and closer, reverberating through the stone arches. The congregation exchanged puzzled glances, their prayerful silence now tinged with curiosity. Something, or someone, was approaching the sacred space. The peace of the morning was about to be shattered in a way no one could have anticipated. The priest had just resumed his sermon, his voice calm and unwavering, when the disturbance grew impossible to ignore. The barking, sharp and relentless, now echoed clearly through the open cathedral doors. Heads turned instinctively, a ripple of confusion spreading through the congregation. Suddenly, a scruffy dog burst into the cathedral, bounding past the heavy wooden doors. Its fur was matted with dirt, and its eyes darted wildly around the room as if searching for something. The dog's sudden appearance was startling, like a jarring note in an otherwise harmonious symphony. The animal skidded to a halt just a few feet inside the entrance, its claws scraping against the polished stone floor. For a moment, it seemed uncertain, its gaze scanning the sea of seated people. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, the dog's focus snapped to the statue of St. John Paul II near the altar. As the Mass reached its midpoint, a serene stillness settled over the congregation. The priest paused to allow a moment of silent prayer, and all was peaceful. But just then, faint noises from the distance broke the quiet, a sharp, insistent barking. At first, it seemed distant, barely noticeable against the backdrop of solemnity, but the barking grew louder and closer, reverberating through the stone arches. The congregation exchanged puzzled glances, their prayerful silence now tinged with curiosity. Something, or someone, was approaching the sacred space. The peace of the morning was about to be shattered in a way no one could have anticipated. The priest had just resumed his sermon, his voice calm and unwavering, when the disturbance grew impossible to ignore. The barking, sharp and relentless, now echoed clearly through the open cathedral doors. Heads turned instinctively, a ripple of confusion spreading through the congregation. Suddenly, a scruffy dog burst into the cathedral, bounding past the heavy wooden doors. Its fur was matted with dirt, and its eyes darted wildly around the room as if searching for something. The dog's sudden appearance was startling, like a jarring note in an otherwise harmonious symphony. The animal skidded to a halt just a few feet inside the entrance, its claws scraping against the polished stone floor. For a moment, it seemed uncertain, its gaze scanning the sea of seated people. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, the dog's focus snapped to the statue of St. John Paul II near the altar. With a low growl, the dog began advancing, its ears pinned back and its tail stiff. Parishioners gasped softly, some leaning away as the dog passed them. It weaved through the pews with surprising determination, its bark growing louder and more insistent with each step. At the altar, the priest paused mid-sentence, his hand frozen in the air where he had been gesturing. The choir fell silent, their harmonious chants replaced by the dog's sharp cries. A few of the younger children giggled nervously, but their parents quickly hushed them, their faces tense with unease. When the dog reached the statue, it stopped abruptly, standing rigid before the marble figure. Its barking intensified, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. The sound was almost rhythmic, as if the dog were trying to communicate something. Some parishioners whispered among themselves, speculating nervously. "What's it doing?" An elderly woman murmured to her neighbor, clutching her rosary tightly. The dog's behavior was unlike anything anyone had seen. It wasn't aggressive, nor did it seem scared. Instead, it appeared purposeful, as though it had been led there for a reason. It began to scratch at the base of the statue with its paws, emitting a strange whimpering sound between barks. A few brave souls stood up to intervene, but the priest raised his hand, signaling them to wait. "Let it be," he said, his voice calm but firm. There was something about the dog's urgency that stilled him, a sense that this was no ordinary disruption. The congregation watched in tense silence, the air thick with anticipation. The dog, undeterred by the attention, continued its strange display, barking and scratching as if uncovering a hidden truth. At that moment, it was as though the sacred and the mundane had collided, leaving everyone unsure of what to expect next. But deep down, a collective feeling began to stir. This was not merely a stray dog seeking shelter. This was something else entirely, something that none of them could yet explain. The dog's actions captivated the congregation. Its barking had a strange rhythm, almost like a code trying to be deciphered. People who had initially been irritated by the intrusion now watched in uneasy silence, their curiosity outweighing their annoyance. Standing before the statue of St. John Paul II, the dog alternated between barking, growling, and scratching at the statue's base. The marble surface beneath its paws began to show faint marks from its insistent claws. Despite its frantic movements, the dog never seemed aggressive toward the people around it. Instead, it acted as though it were sounding an alarm, as if it was desperate for someone, anyone, to understand. The priest stepped forward cautiously, his gaze fixed on the animal. His voice, though calm, carried a note of authority. "What are you trying to tell us, boy?" he murmured. As if it understood him, the dog paused its barking and turned its head to lock eyes with the priest. For a moment, the room felt electric. The dog let out a single, low growl, then returned to scratching furiously at the statue's base. A soft, faint creak echoed through the cathedral, barely audible, but enough to send a shiver through everyone present. The dog tilted its head, ears perked, as though it had been expecting the sound. The priest and a few others stepped closer, eyes scanning the statue nervously. The creaking grew louder, and suddenly, a fine crack appeared at the base of the statue. Gasps erupted from the pews. The dog stood and barked sharply, wagging its tail for the first time. It looked up at the priest, as if saying, "Now you see." "What in God's name is this?" someone murmured. But in that moment, it became clear to everyone. This was no random act of an animal. The dog had led them to something hidden, something sacred, and whatever lay beneath the surface of the statue was about to be revealed. As the final bark echoed off the cathedral's vaulted ceilings, the dog fell completely silent. It sat back on its haunches, head tilted slightly, its intense gaze fixed on the statue of St. John Paul II. The shift was so sudden that it seemed to suck the very air out of the room. The congregation, still frozen in their seats, exchanged uneasy glances. The absence of sound was unnerving, made even more so by the dog's unblinking stare. Not a single whisper or shuffling foot broke the oppressive quiet. Even the children, who had been fidgeting moments before, sat still, wide-eyed and unsure of what to make of the unfolding scene. The priest stood motionless at the altar, his eyes locked on the dog. He felt the weight of something intangible pressing down on him, a sense that the stillness wasn't merely the absence of noise, but the presence of something much larger. "Father," one of the altar servers whispered hesitantly, but the priest raised a hand to quiet him. "Wait," he said softly, his voice barely above a breath. All eyes turned back to the statue. The golden light filtering through the stained glass windows illuminated the figure of St. John Paul II, giving it an almost ethereal glow. For a moment, nothing happened. The statue stood as it always had, tall and unmoving, its marble surface gleaming under the flickering light of nearby candles. The dog, still seated, let out a low whimper, breaking the silence just enough to heighten the tension. Then, as if on cue, a soft creak echoed through the room. The sound was so faint that at first, people thought they'd imagined it. The creak grew louder, more distinct, like the groan of something ancient shifting after years of stillness. The dog's ears perked up, and it stood, tail wagging slightly, as it stared intently at the base of the statue. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation as a hairline crack began to form along the marble pedestal. It wasn't a destructive break, but a deliberate, almost calculated split, as though the stone had been designed to reveal something within. The silence grew heavier, suffocating in its intensity. No one dared to move. The priest took a cautious step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The crack widened, and with a final soft pop, a small compartment at the base of the statue slid open, revealing a hidden cavity. The dog barked once, sharp and clear, as if signaling that the moment they had all been waiting for had arrived. It sat back down, its mission seemingly complete. Inside the revealed compartment lay an object wrapped in faded cloth. The priest knelt down, his hands trembling as he reached for it. The air in the cathedral felt charged, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. As the priest lifted the cloth, the room seemed to shimmer with a strange energy. Within the folds was an ancient scroll, its edges worn but intact. A collective murmur spread through the congregation, a mix of awe, disbelief, and reverence. The dog, now calm and quiet, stood up, turned toward the door, and trotted out of the cathedral without a backward glance. The silence it left behind felt different this time, not heavy or oppressive, but filled with a sense of profound wonder. The priest held the scroll aloft, his voice trembling as he finally spoke. "This is a message meant for us, a message from the past, brought to light by the most unexpected of messengers. The silence that followed was no longer of uncertainty, but of awe, as everyone in the room realized they had just witnessed something extraordinary, a moment that would be remembered and retold for generations to come. The air inside the cathedral felt charged, as though every stone, every candle flame, and every breath had aligned in anticipation of this moment. The priest knelt before the hidden compartment at the base of the statue of St. John Paul II, his hands trembling as he reached for the object inside. The congregation leaned forward collectively, their hearts pounding with a mix of awe and trepidation. Wrapped in a faded, time-worn cloth, the object radiated an aura of mystery. The priest gently unfolded the fragile fabric, revealing an ancient scroll. Its edges were frayed, its parchment yellowed with age, but the inked writing on its surface remained remarkably vivid. The text was penned in elegant, flowing script, and intricate symbols adorned the margins. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some murmured prayers under their breath, while others stared in stunned silence. The dog, still seated a few feet away, let out a single satisfied bark before quietly lying down, its work apparently done. The priest carefully lifted the scroll, holding it up for everyone to see. "This," he said, his voice resonating with emotion, "is a message hidden for decades, perhaps centuries, waiting for the right moment to be found." He unrolled the scroll slowly, revealing lines of text written in Latin. A scholar in the congregation, an elderly man known for his expertise in ancient languages, stepped forward hesitantly. "Father, may I assist?" he asked. The priest nodded and handed the scroll to the man. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the script as he whispered a prayer for understanding. Moments passed as he deciphered the words, the congregation holding their breath in collective suspense. Finally, the scholar looked up, his face pale but radiant with wonder. "It's a letter," he announced, his voice trembling. "A letter believed to be written by St. John Paul II himself." The congregation erupted in soft gasps and murmurs. "What does it say?" someone asked, their voice filled with urgency. The scholar began to translate aloud, his voice echoing through the cathedral. "To those who find this message in the time when it is most needed, know that faith is your guiding star. In the face of trials, seek unity, for the strength of the people lies in their love for one another. This relic is my gift, a fragment of my heart and soul, to remind you that even in the darkest hour, light shall prevail." As he read, tears welled up in the eyes of many. The words felt as though they had been written specifically for that moment, resonating with each listener in a deeply personal way. The scholar continued, "Protect this sacred place, for it is here that hope will rise again. Let this message inspire generations to come, and may those who guard it find peace and purpose in their lives." When the reading ended, silence filled the cathedral, but it was no longer heavy or uncertain. It was a silence of reverence, of hearts overwhelmed by the depth of the saint's words. The priest knelt once more, placing the scroll reverently back into its hidden compartment. He turned to address the congregation. This discovery is no coincidence. It is a reminder, a calling for all of us to carry forward the message of love, hope, and unity. This dog, this humble creature, was our guide today, reminding us that even the unexpected can serve as instruments of divine purpose. The dog, as if understanding its mention, stood, wagged its tail briefly, and trotted out of the cathedral, disappearing as mysteriously as it had arrived. The congregation remained in the cathedral long after the Mass had ended, their hearts stirred by what they had witnessed. Word of the miraculous event spread quickly, drawing pilgrims from near and far to the cathedral to witness the statue and the hidden scroll. The moment became a lasting symbol of faith and the mysterious ways in which divine intervention could manifest. And the story of the dog, the statue, and the revelation was retold countless times, a tale that would inspire generations to believe in the power of faith and the guidance of unseen forces. The discovery of the scroll hidden within the base of St. John Paul II's statue sent ripples through the small town and far beyond. By the following day, word of the extraordinary event had spread like wildfire, carried by whispers, phone calls, and posts on social media. What had begun as a normal Sunday Mass had become the focal point of national, even international attention. The faithful and the curious flocked to the cathedral. Some came to pray, others to see the statue and hear the tale of the mysterious dog that had seemingly uncovered a divine message. Journalists with cameras and notepads crowded the cathedral's courtyard, seeking interviews with anyone who had been present. The priest, though overwhelmed, spoke with quiet conviction about the events. It was not merely a discovery of stone and parchment, he told one reporter, his voice steady despite the cameras. It was a message of hope, a reminder that faith is alive, even in unexpected ways, and it was delivered to us through a creature as humble as a dog. The dog itself, however, was nowhere to be found. Some speculated that it was a stray guided by divine intervention. Others believed it was a symbolic messenger, destined to vanish once its purpose was fulfilled. Despite efforts to locate the animal, it seemed to have disappeared entirely, adding to the air of mystery surrounding the event. Inside the cathedral, the atmosphere was transformed. Pilgrims knelt before the statue in prayer, some moved to tears as they reflected on the saint's words. The once hidden compartment was left open, protected by a clear case, so visitors could see where the scroll had rested for so many years. The scroll itself was placed in a specially designed display near the altar, carefully preserved behind glass and flanked by candles. Local historians and church scholars began examining the scroll in greater detail. While the text itself was profound, the parchment's age and authenticity added another layer of wonder. Carbon dating revealed it to be decades old, matching the time when St. John Paul II would have been alive. Handwriting experts compared the script to preserved letters from the saint and confirmed its similarity. "This is not just a relic," the bishop declared during a special mass held in honor of the discovery. "It is a piece of living history, a bridge between the saint's time and ours." The event also sparked a renewed sense of community in the town. People who had drifted away from the church began attending services again, drawn by a sense of purpose and unity. Others volunteered to help maintain the cathedral, clean its grounds, or assist the elderly and disabled who came to visit. The priest remarked one evening, "The message wasn't just for us to find, it was for us to live." For weeks, the story dominated headlines, inspiring debates and discussions among theologians, skeptics, and the faithful alike. Some dismissed the event as mere coincidence, a stray dog acting on instinct, but even skeptics couldn't deny the timing and significance of the discovery. For those who had been in the cathedral that day, the experience lingered. Parents told their children about the dog and the scroll, describing how it had felt to witness something so inexplicable yet deeply meaningful. Some said they had felt a warmth in the air during the revelation, a presence that couldn't be explained. Months later, the town held a commemorative event to mark the discovery. A plaque was installed at the base of the statue, inscribed with St. John Paul II's words from the scroll. "In the face of trials, seek unity, for the strength of the people lies in their love for one another." The story of the dog and the scroll became a symbol of hope, not just for the town, but for countless others who heard it. It reminded people that faith often comes in unexpected forms, that even in a world filled with doubt, moments of wonder still exist. And though the dog never returned, its legacy endured. Many believed it was a guardian sent for that singular purpose. In the quiet moments of prayer within the cathedral, some even claimed to feel a soft presence, as if the mysterious messenger still watched over them, ensuring the message of love and unity would never be forgotten. As the months passed, the extraordinary events at the cathedral gradually settled into the rhythms of daily life, but the story of the dog, the statue, and the hidden scroll left a permanent imprint on the hearts of all who had witnessed it, and on many who had only heard of it. The cathedral, once a place of quiet worship for the local community, became a beacon for pilgrims and seekers from across the world. It was no longer just a house of prayer. It had become a sanctuary of inspiration, a reminder that the divine could touch even the smallest, most unassuming corners of life. The priest, now accustomed to addressing larger congregations, delivered a heartfelt homily during a special service marking the first anniversary of the event. He stood at the pulpit, his voice calm yet resonant, his eyes scanning the faces of the crowd that filled the pews. "My dear friends," he began, "what happened here that day was not just a discovery of an artifact or a moment of mystery. It was a reminder that faith and hope are alive in the world, often working in ways we cannot immediately understand. The dog, the scroll, the crack in the statue, all of these were threads woven into a tapestry of meaning that continues to unfold." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But let us not forget the essence of what was revealed. St. John Paul II's message was clear. In the face of trials, seek unity, for the strength of the people lies in their love for one another. The congregation sat in thoughtful silence, the memory of the dog's piercing barks and the statue's hidden compartment still vivid in their minds. "Unity and love are not grand gestures," the priest continued. "They are found in the small, quiet acts of kindness we show to one another, in forgiving, in helping, in listening." The dog, a humble creature, served as the messenger of this great truth. It reminded us that the extraordinary can emerge from the ordinary, and that we, too, are called to be messengers of hope in the lives we touch. As he finished, the organ began to play softly, and the congregation rose to join in a hymn of thanksgiving. The sound filled the cathedral, rising to the vaulted ceilings, carrying the spirit of the day outward into the world. In the weeks that followed, the town returned to a quieter rhythm, but the memory of the event remained alive in subtle ways. A new stained glass window was commissioned for the cathedral, depicting the dog sitting before the statue of St. John Paul II, its eyes full of purpose and its posture one of unwavering devotion. Beneath the image was inscribed the saint's words from the scroll, a reminder to all who entered. The story spread beyond the town and became the subject of books, documentaries, and countless discussions. For some, it was a source of renewed faith. For others, it was a profound mystery that sparked contemplation. But for all, it was a story that reminded them of the beauty and power of the unknown. The dog itself was never seen again, but its presence lingered in the hearts of those who believed it had been sent for a purpose. In moments of doubt, people would recall the animal's determined bark, its silent gaze, and the miracle it had uncovered. As the years turned into decades, the event passed into legend, retold by grandparents to grandchildren as a tale of faith, mystery, and hope. And though the physical signs of the moment, the crack in the statue, the open compartment, the ancient scroll, remained as reminders, the true legacy was carried in the actions of the people. Inspired by the saint's message, they sought unity in their lives, becoming living examples of the love and strength that had been called forth on that extraordinary day. In the end, the story of the dog and the scroll became more than a moment in time. It became a living parable, a closing note to remind the world that sometimes the simplest messengers carry the most profound truths.